Joining us right now, Republican Congressman Ted Yoho of Florida. He's a member of the House Foreign Affairs Committee, also the House Freedom Caucus. Congressman, thanks for joining us.
Thanks for having me on, Wolf.
All right, so you just heard Phil's report. You know the House Freedom Caucus put out its official position on Twitter. I'll read it to you. HFC, House Freedom Caucus, opposes the caps deal. We support funding our troops, but growing the size of the government by 13% is not what the voters sent us here to do. That's in contrast to what we heard from the Speaker, your Speaker, Paul Ryan. He said he believes there would be enough votes in the House to pass the Senate deal. You think any members of your Freedom Caucus will vote yay?
Yeah, I think there are members on there. I'm undecided yet. You know, the bill came out. We got the bill this morning. It's 652 pages. Of course, about 130 of those pages are an amendment that was on the other Senate bill. We haven't been all the way through that yet, so we've got to weigh into that. And, you know, we've got to fund the government. I think we're all in agreement with that. But how you fund it is a different question that we've got to work through. There's some ugly stuff in this that just adds to our debt. And as one of the generals in the past said, the biggest threat to our national security is our debt. This is adding $1.2 trillion just to our deficit before the fiscal year end of 2018, just the deficit. And so the bill's going to have a little over $500 billion extra spending. And so we've got to weigh through what do we have to do for our district, for our state, you know, coming from Florida with the hurricane, but we've got to balance that on our nation.
Because the military, you heard the Defense Secretary, James Mattis, he really wants it. The military wants the additional funding for the men and women of the U.S. military. But you're saying right now you're still undecided? I'm
undecided on this, yeah. You know, and I've got to do that balancing, you know. And this is where it gets really tough. You know, that was Admiral McMullen that said that several years back. We can do the short-term fixes for these things now, but the long-term bill is going to be there. That's going to be on the back of the American taxpayers. You see the rise of the interest rates. You know what the debt, the interest on our debt is. And so it's a juggling act. Do we serve the immediate now, or do we look long-term? And the mere fact that we're just funding till March 24th. This is the 5th CR since the end of the fiscal year. You remember the days they had the little donut spare tire on our cars? The manufacturers did that to cut costs and to save money. And it was meant to be a temporary fix for our car to get from the flat tire to the service station. But people running down the interstate 70 miles an hour with that little donut tire, then they'd have 2 or 3 of them on there. That's where
for the military,
is right now.
For a lot of other critically important spending issues, there's a 2-year plan. It's not just going to simply go till the end of March, and that's why they want it. Certainly the Republican leadership and the Democratic leadership in the Senate want it. Here's what a lot of your fiscal conservatives like you...
And I agree with that. We need that longer term. Go ahead.
...probably find hard to believe that there's a Republican in the White House, Republican leadership in the Senate, Republican leadership in the House. The last couple of years, mostly during the Obama administration, the federal annual budget deficit was around $500 or $600 billion. Do you know what it's going to be this current fiscal year 2018, if all of this goes through? Do you know what the federal annual deficit for this year, Congressman, is going to be?
It's $1.2 trillion is what I've heard from a member from the Ways and Means Committee.
It's going to be more than $1 trillion.
Right,
it's been a long time since there was a $1 trillion annual debt. And so the question, I guess, that a lot of people are asking is, who's responsible for increasing this federal deficit, the debt in this year going from, let's say, $600 billion to over $1 trillion? Who do you blame for that? Are you blaming the president?
No, the American people are going to look at Congress and said, "You guys, we gave you the majority for a reason," and so we're going to take a hit on this. And again, Wolf, you and I have talked about this. This is going up regardless who's in the White House until Congress.
Let me interrupt, Congressman, because as you know, you want to cut what's called entitlement spending, Social Security, Medicare.
Mandatory spending.
You want to cut it. The Speaker wants to cut it. The Republican leadership wants to cut it. You know who doesn't want to touch any of that?
Yeah, it's the president.
The president. So I asked the question, because if you started to deal with those entitlement spendings, you might be able to get closer to a balanced budget. But if you're not going to deal with that, because the president says you can't touch Social Security, you can't touch Medicare, you can't touch Medicaid. He said it repeatedly during the campaign. You're just going to have an increase in the deficit every year.
You're absolutely right. And you and I have talked about this before. It's not cutting those programs. It's reforming those programs so that they meet their long-term goal that they were designed for. And as you and I have talked about, it doesn't matter if this president or the next president wants to deal with mandatory spending. We either, as a nation, deals with the mandatory spending, or mandatory spending will deal with the American people or the American government, and it'll be through the form of austerity measures like we've seen in Puerto Rico, we've seen in Greece, and we've seen in Spain. And if we keep pushing this off, it'll be harder to fix. We need to, I don't want to say we need to just grow up and say we have got to address these as a nation. This is not just a Republican issue, it's not just a Democratic issue. This is something that's going to affect every American across the board.
All right,
every American.
I'll be anxious to see how you vote later today on this legislation.
Stay tuned.
Let me quickly switch gears, get to one of our top stories right now. The White House Chief of Staff, John Kelly. As you know, CNN is reporting that General Kelly, he knew about the domestic abuse allegations against the White House Staff Secretary, Rob Porter, for months. Porter has now resigned, but did nothing. Do you think you can still trust the judgment of John Kelly to have that critically important job?
I feel very comfortable with General Kelly. I've met with him. I've talked to him. I don't know the ins and outs of what went on there. I can't answer that. They've got offices of ethics. They've got their protocol over there. The important thing is we don't tolerate those kind of abuses anywhere, and Rob Portman has himself from that and resign. Let's hope we can all do a better job and do a better job of screening. I think anybody that's owned a business has gone through this.
Rob Porter has now, he's presumably going to be out as early as today. But, you know,
right.
the question about General Kelly, served for many years. He's a four-star general, retired Marine Corps. He's dealt with top secret security clearance, classified information his whole career. If the FBI keeps telling him, you know what, it's a year now, more than a year, we're not going to be able to give your top deputy over there top secret security clearances. There are issues in his past. And you would think he would say, well, what are those issues? And if he's told that the allegations include beating up 2 ex-wives, he's not going to get top secret security clearances. You would think he would say, you know what, maybe he should have a different job.
From what you just said, I would agree 100% with you. But again, I don't know what the conversations were, but I would have to agree with you.
Because more than a year waiting for security clearances, that's a long time when you're the White House Staff Secretary, one of the most important jobs.
It is.
And your responsibility is to make sure the president gets all the classified documents he can read, he can study, and you're delivering that to the president, and you don't have those kinds of permanent clearances. That's a serious problem in and of itself.
It is, and that points out another problem of, you know, the fights that we have, these short-term spending fights. You know, we've got to focus on getting this government running and doing what it's supposed to do so that we can work through these things so much quicker and we can focus 20 years down the road. You know, and we need to look outside of what's just going on here in America. We need to prepare for what China's doing, you know, the growth of China, the aggression of China. And we can't do that if we're focused on short-term crisis management. And this is where I fault leadership of the majority party, which I'm in, is that we need to raise up our gaze, that we're looking down the road. We're looking not just at the end of this Congress, but 20, 50 years down the road, so that we don't always operate in short-term spending, crisis management. It's the worst way to spend the American people's money, and we've been outspoken about this ever since we've been up here, and we're going to continue to do that until that process changes. It's a broken process, both in the House and both in the Senate also.
Congressman Ted Yoho, thanks.